Okay, well, welcome to the IDRPP's Autism Echo. I'm thrilled to have you guys here today. We are recording today's session. We use that for educational purposes as well as quality improvement. You are free to go back and use these resources, review them, share them with colleagues. They are stored on our Canvas page as well as our YouTube channel, so they are always there. If you're like me, takes me a minute to gain and gather all that information into my brain, so I go back and watch them a few times. Um, Again, just a huge shout out to the Autism Council of Utah and the Autism Awareness License Plate for providing funding for this project. It's a great way they've just been able to support us to get this information out to you, and it's such a need throughout our state. Um, Key components of an echo session. If you've never joined an echo session, welcome. We're thrilled to have you on the call. If you feel comfortable turning your camera on, it just helps us see all those amazing people out in Zoom world. But it is to build that professional networking. Sometimes we are isolated here in the state of Utah, and knowing that there's Justin out in Vernal that I can reach out to and get some ideas, it's always a great way to just build that professional networking. We do always have a speaker, so we get Debbie Bilder today that is going to be talking to us about sleep and autism. She's amazing. If you've never heard her before, you're going to love it. She's renowned in her field and expertise. So, and then we also do a case presentation and a small breakout room where we get to brainstorm and talk about the case. I am actually the one who's presenting a family that I work on today, so I cannot wait to hear all of your guys' amazing ideas on how I can help support this family I'm working with. It is an interactive community. One of our hub members, Joe, will be monitoring the chat for us. So if you have any questions or comments that you want to make sure that you share, he will make sure that that gets handled. And again, if you want to do a case narrative, I know that they're not always easy and fun to share a case, but if you have a case and you want that to be talked about, I will be glad to present it for everybody. We do talk about sensitive topics, so please make sure that you just keep the privacy, avoid any identifiable information. If you have any questions, please reach out to one of our hub members. They all have an asterisk in front of their name, so they're easier to find on our chat. And then I've moved my cursor so it went to a different screen, but here's how to rename your profile and raise your hand in case the forever years that we've now been on Zoom, you don't remember how to do that. But if you also have any questions about that, please reach out to me directly and I can help you. In order to get a certificate of attendance or a credit for attendance, we do ask that you complete the survey. So throughout today's session, we'll be dropping the survey link. Again, that just gives us information on how these sessions are going and what we can change based on your guys' feedback. Canvas is where we store everything, so PowerPoints, case recommendations, any of that information that is shared from presenters is always on our Canvas page. So if you would like access to that, please email the Autism Echo at aggies.usu.edu email, and we will get you access to our Canvas page. And again, those recommendations that are discussed in small breakout groups are always available for everybody. So today, when we generate all these amazing ideas, we may not be in the breakout group, but they're available to go back and review and look at. So it may be something that you want to use as future resources. Just another shout out and plug for those case studies. So if you're interested in doing that or want to talk about it, just email autismecho@aggies.usu and we will get you set up on that schedule. We do have a social media where we share information about upcoming echo sessions as well as resources or things that people provide to us. So if you've not taken a minute, please follow us on social media. I am going to stop sharing and turn the time over to our amazing speaker today and let her get going. And Deb, if you'll say something, I will spotlight
Hi,
you for everybody.
thank you for inviting me to, and I just make sure, okay, good, I don't have my mute on. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with your group today. I sleep disturbance and autism, like these are my favorite subjects, particularly as they go together so intrinsically. So I appreciate you asking me to kind of discuss this topic so you all could understand what we know about these concerns and how they are related. So these are my disclosures. They actually don't have anything to do with autism, but rather inborn errors of metabolism, which is another area of my research. And I just want to start with kind of, this big picture. Like at 6 months of age, infants who will develop autism have significantly greater sleep onset delay than infants who do not. We see this by 6 months of age. Even when you're comparing these infants to their siblings, to other siblings of kids who are autistic. So this is from a study that follows babies that are younger siblings of autistic children. And this way, this is how we've grown to understand how autism develops. And this particular study looked at sleep patterns and even the other high-risk infants. If those children were not going to develop autism, they did not have the same degree of sleep onset delay as those high-risk children who did. So by 6 months of age. And the relationship between the sleep onset delay and autism was independent of any other observable measure of behavior or development. So at 6 months of age, this was subsequently linked to increases in the hippocampal volume. So this is a part of your brain, and it's a part of your brain in particular that's involved with memory. And it turned out that only those infants who developed autism had this link between their sleep onset delay and the increased volume of this part of their brain at 6 months of age, which only became larger. And we cannot diagnose autism at 6 months of age. It's a prodromal condition, and we understand this better because of studies of these younger siblings. Otherwise, it's 2% of our population. We wouldn't possibly be able to have large enough group of babies to follow unless they already were at risk. And as you are likely aware, younger siblings of kids with autism have a much higher risk. In fact, about 20% develop autism. So that's a really nice group to follow over time so we can understand how autism emerges. And we've learned that it's something that develops. Even though a third of kids with autism will present with an obvious regression, we now know over the last decade that these symptoms of autism actually occur, like there's an onset of them, at 9 months of age, a year of age, and subsequently in life. And and it doesn't, and it makes sense that the brain's going to change before you're going to have physical symptoms or emotional symptoms of a condition. But needless to say, there's an incredible link between sleep and the development of autism. And so that's why I'm glad to be speaking about this with you today. So we're going to talk about what happens during sleep. Why is this so important? What's the big deal? And then why sleeplessness stresses us out. You don't have to have autism to be stressed out with sleep, although certainly those with autism who have a sleep disturbance can really struggle in particular. And we'll talk about that relationship in particular related to autism and sleep disturbance. And then we're going to talk about, well, how to address this problem. How do we fix this problem to help kids with autism sleep better? So let's talk about sleep, like the physiology of falling asleep, because what we were talking about earlier is it's about the onset of sleep, the ability to get your brain into sleep mode and fall asleep. for most folks who struggle with autism, who struggle with sleep, it's really that onset. It's that ability to kind of get their brain to just start shutting down and go to sleep. That really that major issue is. And so this all happens, it's related to our circadian clock. And our circadian clock functions through triggers from light. And so this is our eye. And at the outside of our, or the inside of our eye is the retina. And that retina will see the light, will be impacted by the light. And when it sees light, it will tell the suprachiasmatic nucleus, excuse me, the part of our brain which produces melatonin, it will tell it not to produce or not to release melatonin. However, when the sun goes down, so doesn't that block. And when it's no longer being blocked, melatonin will be released to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is what ends up really being our circadian clock and telling our brain, to go to sleep. And so it's a very physiologic phenomena related to light. And so it's the major regulator of our circadian rhythm. And the summer solstice really challenges our mood stability. And those who are predisposed to mood instability, like bipolar disorder, because of this relationship between light and our circadian clock and our ability to sleep at night. Even if you're resting in a room that's dark, if you're looking at a light emitting screen, like your phone or your iPad, this will influence the circadian clock, because if you think about it, this is like, that's your retina and it's seeing light, even though the rest of you is dark. So that blue light, which is really part of our screens, that has a dark side in regards to interfering with our sleep. Even when we think we're doing what we need to be doing, having the rest of the room dark, by having that light stimulation, it's gonna affect our ability to fall asleep. Sleep. I know we sleep through this. So we sleep through all of this, but I really want you to see that this is a very dynamic process, and it is a cycle. And you fall asleep here, and then you start going in to the deeper stages of sleep. And you go into the deep stages of sleep, and then back up into the lighter stages of sleep. The lightest stage of sleep is our REM sleep. That is our dream sleep, which is our REM sleep. And then you can see you then go back into these deep stages of sleep, stage 3 or 4, these very restorative aspects of sleep. And as you can see, it's a very predictable cycle, and you get most of your deep sleep at the beginning of the night. You can see how it's not like there are these even periods between these cycles. Rather, most of this is non-REM, the deeper stages, and then you see higher REM. And then as the night goes on, that's when you get more and more of that dream sleep until it's time to wake up. And you can see even by 2 or 3 in the morning, you're not really getting into that deepest stage 4. You've already done that. You're now looking at more 3 and then more REM, and then you're waking up. So this is a restorative process. This is a process that happens to all of us every night. This is critical for our ability to function in the daytime. So even though we sleep through all of this, our brain is working to go through this to establish that restorative aspect of having a restful night. So it restores our ability to think. It consolidates memory during that time. Like I said, it stabilizes our mood and regulates our emotions. We need that sleep consistently night after night to help us regulate. It's really important with our cardiovascular system. And so individuals who have shift work and may be shifting when they're awake versus when they're asleep from week to week, that has quite a toll on their physical health beyond their brain, their cardiovascular system. And it also influences our immune response. I don't know if you can think back, but when you've had periods of time where you have been sleep deprived, you just didn't have enough ability to get to sleep or time to get to sleep, that wears down your immune system, and you're going to be more susceptible to getting sick. So a good night's sleep is essential to managing daytime stress, period. Because if you think about what does a sleep deprived child look like? You know, they're tired, they're irritable. I know this may seem kind of weird to you, but they're hyperactive. And so the excessive daytime sleepiness that we ordinarily associate with sleep deprivation, that's older kids and us, we adults. The younger kids, the preschool age kids, and the early grade school age kids, they will typically present with hyperactivity that's reflecting their lack of restorative sleep. Hungry, and then of course their poor daytime functioning. And so consistent restorative sleep is the foundation for any leap into wellness. You know, I work in the mental health field. I am a psychiatrist as well as a pediatrician, and I specialize in working with individuals across the lifespan with severe developmental disabilities. Typically, I am getting involved when that person is really struggling with their ability to regulate their emotions and find themselves very agitated and irritable and upset. And it all starts with sleep. It's like if this person is not sleeping consistently night after night for a restorative period of time, that's where we start on helping them begin to get a grasp, a place to stand on, with helping with their functioning in the rest of the day. And then, I mean, and I know, you know, Joe, I think you had said you're a behaviorist. Um, you know, you're teaching these families and these parents, you know, various techniques to help their child make better choices and learn various skills. If their child's not sleeping, they will not either. And it is particularly hard for them to follow all these great recommendations you may have in the daytime if they too are sleep deprived. So there's nothing like helping parents sleep by ensuring that their child is sleeping every night. So if you think about our arousal regulation, you know, our job is to maintain this optimal level of arousal where you're not sleepy, but you're not stressed and upset. You've got this optimal point between sleepiness and stress where you function best, your memory functions best, your mood is best. This is this optimal area of arousal. And it is no coincidence that sleep is a part of this because our stress response is linked to our sleep. I mean, on a very, very basic level, our cortisol, our body's stress hormone cortisol, is intrinsically linked to our sleep. So if you look here, and I wish I could take off this red line because we're not discussing it, although because that involves our core body temperature. Although this did explain why I'm always just so cold at night and I need more blankets. Well, maybe this is why, because I always get cold at night, but it's not going to relate to the rest of this. Melatonin. So I told you guys how there's low melatonin release until it starts getting dark in the back of our eyes, our retina no longer sees that light. And so it's no longer keeping the gate down to release the melatonin. So the gate goes up, there goes our melatonin, this nice peak, and then it starts going back down as we get closer to the morning. Well, our plasma cortisol is linked to our melatonin, and they're always in approximation to each other. So just as this is peaking up our melatonin, our cortisol should be hitting its nadir, its lowest point. And then as we sleep, it builds and builds and builds such that about an hour after we wake up, we have what's called the awakening response. The highest amount of cortisol we're going to have that day happens right then. This relationship between sleep, melatonin, and cortisol is you cannot separate it. It is clockwork. It works together. So a little bit more about cortisol. So as I mentioned, during our sleep, it rises. Remember, that's our stress hormone. And we have the peak about an hour after we wake up, which is intrinsically linked to our sleep and to melatonin. You know, then it works its way down. We have various different peaks, you know, but it's making its way down. This is that lull. Like, I don't know about you, but like right around like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I'm like, oh, I can use a nap. Like, so you can see it kind of makes its way down in its little bits. But ultimately, by the end of the awake period, right? Because it peaks right when we wake up, and by the time we finish our awake period, it is low. It's at its nadir before it starts again. the difference, the issue with cortisol, because we really do need it to be healthy, to be able to respond to stressful events. What relates to cortisol isn't that, it's not about people having too high cortisol, that they're stressed out. It really has to do with this rhythm in regards to the difference between how high the peak is and how low the low is. Like this difference between the peak and the low is what really is reflecting well-being and health. So it's not about overall, large amounts of cortisol, or it's really about how much does your body change in its cortisol throughout the day. And that's what reflects wellness. The robustness of this curve reflects wellness. So I'm going to show you some examples. Oh, and by the way, as I mentioned, that cortisol, that stress, our sleep, it is all connected. Yes, it may be up here in the brain, but it produces all these hormones or relates to all these hormones that affect our heart, our liver, our muscle, our immune system. I mean, it's all linked together. And part of that linking together with our sleep is the role with cortisol. Like that's just part of how everything is linked together. So we talked about this important, curve in depression and well-being. And this is looking at that cortisol curve for depression, which is in the red, compared to the blue, which are your non-depressed people. And what I want you to notice right here as they're going through their day is that the people who are depressed never get to the lower cortisol. So in other words, these folks who are well get to low cortisol, a much lower level than those who are depressed. They have a much more suppressed curve. But their peak is not higher. They have identical peaks. So it's not about how much you've got. It's about how well you're able to have this nice, robust up and down and hit that low. And that's really where that wellness comes from, is that nice, robust rhythm versus a more compressed rhythm, which is what you're seeing. So sleep and cortisol. And so when you mess with one, you mess with both. So this is a really nice study. And what's black here is the sleep time. And so this is a person who ordinarily falls asleep at 11 p.m. and wakes up at 7. And this is their cortisol level. And you can see that right when they fall asleep, that is their lowest point of cortisol. And then they're asleep, and then they rise during your sleep. And you can see, shortly after waking, within that first hour, they have their peak. And then it makes its way, back down. Okay. This person in this experiment then shifted their sleep so that instead of sleeping from 11 p.m. until 7, they went to sleep at 7. They stayed awake and then they went to sleep at 7, and they slept from 7, until 3 in the afternoon. Look at the rhythm. There's no rhythm there. It's like you just lost that curve. Do you see that? That's day 1. Day 2, they're still sleeping from 7 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. Do you see a curve coming back? Can't you see that it's starting to come back? And then by the time you hit day 5, they've got their curve back. So their body has adjusted to their new sleep pattern and allowed that curve of the cortisol to restore, so that they have a nice low point and a nice high point. That's what you want for wellness. If you're not consistently getting a good night's sleep, you can be hanging out here with your cortisol with a less robust curve. And that is what can really set you up for challenges. And our patients, their clients, setting up for challenges in regards to making good choices when they just don't have that restorative sleep. Okay. So our stress response is programmed in part during pregnancy. When we're inside our moms, there is a period of time where our stress response, what we call our HPA axis, that is programmed just towards the middle of pregnancy. And we know that programming is likely off in those who have autism. And so, like I said, this programming occurs during pregnancy. And we here in Utah, a URAD study, the Utah Registry for Autism and Developmental Disabilities, partnered with several institutions across the state to do this study where we were able to look at signs, hormones in the mother's blood during pregnancy that reflect this programming and identify that this programming is happening differently for these babies who ultimately develop autism than would be expected in the babies who did not develop autism. So there, this goes all the way back to in utero for us in regards to that relationship between our stress response and for our kids with autism. And so it's no surprise then for you guys that we see differences in that cortisol rhythm between those with autism and those who are neurotypical. The difference is different regarding their intellectual functioning, their cognitive functioning. So those with normal cognitive functioning, you'll see that same awakening response that we talked about and the same amount of cortisol released throughout the day. But you'll see a flattening and the cortisol decline with a higher nadir. So similar to when you saw that that curve with the depression, where that cortisol just didn't get down to the lower amount before it started to rise, that you would expect in someone who wasn't depressed. Similarly, these folks may have had a curve in regards to the awakening response, which was normal, but they never dropped their cortisol all the way down to where the rest of us did before they started their sleep. And the elevated evening cortisol was not surprisingly associated with daily stress and their sensory sensitivity. And we do know that about sleep. These sleep disturbances that we see in autism are associated as well with some of the sensory sensitivity and the different responses to sensory input that our autistic folks experience. There was a subgroup of about a quarter of these kids who had a particularly flattened cortisol rhythm. Now, that's those with normal intellectual functioning. If you also look at those who have co-occurring cognitive disability, you saw elevated cortisol throughout the day with the flattening that we talked about. And there was a relationship as well between the cortisol levels and the impairment in social interaction and learning. And so, not surprisingly, when we actually measure this, and it's not easy to measure because as you can see, cortisol, you can't just take a level anytime during the day. It's not helpful. You've got to take them throughout the day to understand what that rhythm is looking like. So it's a tough thing to study, but when it's studied well, it can really tell us a lot about experiences of people with autism. This is another thing that I thought you'd find really interesting with that stress response. And so this stressor was getting an MRI scan. So that's a brain scan. So these kids were participating in an MRI study. And what these investigators wanted to understand is how do autistic kids' responses to that stressor of an MRI differ from a cortisol perspective than kids who do not have autism. And so what they found is that there was a significant increase in response to that stressor. So you can see these are the autistic kids, and they had a much higher serum cortisol level, salivary cortisol level, so in your saliva, than those who were typically developing. However, when you repeated this in those with normal IQ, there wasn't any difference in subsequent responses. So they did accommodate to this, but their initial reaction was pretty amplified. So sleep cycle and cortisol rhythm. So when both are already dysregulated. And so for me, when I'm working with a person who has very dysregulated behavior in the daytime, dysregulated mood and reactivity to things around them that are really getting in their way of being able to experience their community the way we want our folks to be in the community. When I'm getting involved with someone like that, I'm not measuring their cortisol levels. I told you, you can't just do a spot level. It's not helpful. You have to really look at multiple levels throughout the day. And we're certainly not going to do that to these individuals, but I can infer that their dysregulation I'm seeing with their anxiety, with their emotions, with their behavior, with their mood is likely reflective, in a disrupted cortisol rhythm. And when I also hear that they're not sleeping well, which goes with it, that's where I start, because I can't change their cortisol rhythm, but I can change their sleep. I can help them establish a restorative, consistent night's sleep for them and their family. And what will I expect to follow suit is then a restructuring and an improvement in that really nice cortisol rhythm that I showed you. So it's like, so when I see these folks and they're very dysregulated, I start with sleep. And I will not move beyond the topic of sleep and helping them until we have gotten restorative sleep. And then we can move on with how else we're going to work. So 60 to 80% or more, 85% of kids with autism have insomnia. So no surprise. There's different types of insomnia. There's delayed sleep onset, which I referred to earlier, and there's those infants. I can tell you that's just my general experience. That's almost always there. It's really unusual to see other aspects of sleep disturbance without that delayed onset. They can also have intermittent awakenings. And so they fall asleep, but even once they're asleep, they keep on waking up. I think the important thing to realize about this is if you recall that graph, so I'll just get there so you don't have to think too hard. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention is as I mentioned, we go in and out of these deeper stages of sleep. You're not going to wake up typically in stage 3, 4 sleep. You're just not. But I can tell you when you hit REM sleep, many of us do wake up. Like you very likely are waking up throughout the night. You just don't remember it. So because you fall right back to sleep. But it's actually normal to be waking up throughout the night. It's just we fall right back to sleep and we don't even remember. This is an issue when you have sleep apnea or you work with someone who has sleep apnea. REM sleep will worsen their sleep apnea. And so they'll be particularly prone to waking up in the middle of the night. So these kids, when they're waking up in the middle of the night, it's not random. They're likely waking up as they cycle in and out of REM sleep. Okay. So premature awakening. So instead of sleeping until it's time to get up for school or whatever your day's activities are, waking up hours beforehand and not being able to return to sleep. So these are the aspects of insomnia that I see and that we think about when we think about sleep disturbance and autism. As I mentioned earlier and alluded to earlier, this has a substantial effect on their parents' sleep and really increases their parental stress. And just when I work with kids and adults with autism who have a significant sleep disturbance, I just really try to be mindful of what I'm asking of parents because I know their sleep is very much affected by this as well. So if you think about contributors to insomnia, I mean, we talked about this starting all the way back to like by 6 months of age. So obviously, there are circadian rhythm issues. And I can tell you that there are definitely circadian rhythm genes that have variants that are associated with autism. We do know that various circadian genes, are linked to increased risk of autism. And then there's abnormal melatonin release. We know that too. We know that the melatonin released in these kids differ than in neurotypical kids. But there's also this behavioral insomnia. And I really think it's important to recognize that even though sleep is a very physiologic experience, it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's very much responsive to its environment. It's responsive certainly to light, but it can also be responsive to other types of aspects to the environment, like stimulation, excitement. Going to sleep is a process that kids with autism may not experience easily and intrinsically. And so this is, it's very common that these kids need a approach behaviorally to help them prepare themselves and their bodies to go to sleep. And so this behavioral insomnia is something that is a very important part of helping folks fall asleep. Then there's the arousal and sensory dysregulation. And you can imagine a child who is very sensitive to things in their environment can struggle, particularly in a more chaotic or noisy environment. And then psychosocial stress affects all of our sleeps. We talked about sleep apnea. This happens too, can happen with our kids with autism. I have kids with autism who have nocturnal seizures, meaning that they have seizures in the middle of the night. This can wake them up and affect their seizures. In fact, there's kids who have seizures at night who don't have them in the daytime. Their whole seizure disorder only occurs at night when they're asleep. Then, of course, there's restless leg, and then there's discomfort. So kids with the autism have a lot of gastrointestinal issues. In fact, it's even more common, believe it or not, than sleep disturbance. It's 90% or more of those with autism will have gastrointestinal issues, reflux, constipation. This can really affect their sleep quality, particularly reflux when they're lying flat. If they have a really inflamed esophagus and they're lying flat, they can be experiencing pain and discomfort. So understanding, what can be contributing to these issues is really important. And then, of course, psychiatric disorders. When I'm getting involved, it's, these kids are really struggling throughout the day in a very pervasive manner. And so I'm variably identifying some psychiatric concerns in addition to these other things that need to be addressed as well. This is a talk all in its own right. And I would be happy to talk to you guys about psychiatric disorders and autism, but I'm gonna leave it there for right now. So, correcting a sleep disturbance. The Autism Treatment Network has a sleep toolkit that is very helpful. It has a lot of great ideas for families to help support their child's sleep hygiene. So, sleep hygiene involves the behaviors or I should say habits that surround going to sleep. And by thinking about it from a hygiene perspective and kind of cleaning it up to really set yourself up for success, you're setting your child up for success and helping them fall asleep. So you want a comfortable bedroom, the right temperature, as quiet as possible, dark. And really the tricky thing about this though, is that if something else is going on in the household, so maybe your young child is trying to go to sleep at 8 p.m., but the parents or the older kids are watching something really funny on TV or a movie or whatever, like, there's something going on. That kid's missing out. If that child is autistic, that may not go very well, and it may be very hard to help that child fall asleep if there's something they're going to miss out on. And so it's not unusual in some of these kids with really difficult sleep problems that having everyone, follow some type of routine really just helps that child follow that routine as well, and just choosing a bedtime and sticking with it and keeping it. The other aspect of this is, so like I said, the Autism Treatment Network has a toolkit, but there's a lot of different aspects of sleep hygiene. We'll talk a little bit about it in a moment, but it really is a whole list. And it's not like you change everything all at once. When I work with folks, it's really about thinking about all the possible things that can make this better and looking at what the lowest hanging fruit is, because you're talking about changing habits and changing behavior. And that is not easy. So melatonin, so this is made from serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in our brain. Interestingly, elevated serotonin is the most consistent biomarker in autism. We have no idea why. It's been over 50 years that we've identified this. We still don't know why, but it is a consistent biomarker in autism. But what we can tell you is there are many treatment studies. I put 10 plus. I'm sure there's even more now. That support the use of melatonin. And I'm just suggesting here 3 to 5 milligrams. I definitely know folks who use less and that works for them, which is great. But typically I'm, suggesting 3 to 5, about 30 minutes before bedtime, for insomnia for children with autism. Like I said, there's multiple studies that support this. And I have found clinically that kids and adults with autism respond better to melatonin than the rest of us. There really just something about that autism that interrupts their own melatonin release, but also for whatever reason just makes them nicely responsive to melatonin. The one thing about melatonin that I do
Debbie, before
yes.
you move on.
Oh, there's a question. Thank you, Joe. Yes.
Yeah, no problem. Stephanie was just asking, is there any age restriction for melatonin use?
That is a good question. I don't know the answer, but I can get that for you. I can tell you an anecdote if that helps. So my youngest child, who's now 13, is autistic. And when he was 2, and I hadn't been using melatonin because I was like, well, I don't know, he's an infant and I remember when I made it to his 2-year well child check, I talked to his pediatrician, who is Katie Jolma, and I don't know if any of you know Katie, but she retired recently. She is She's Paul Carbone's wife, who of course is also a pediatrician who you certainly may be aware of. But Katie is amazing, and she was my kid's pediatrician. And I trusted her no matter what. That's why she was my pediatrician. And I remember asking her when my child came in at 2 years of age, because I was so, so tired. I said, can I go ahead and just give him melatonin? And she said, yes, give him melatonin. So, I mean, I would have to look at the literature to see the youngest age for which it's okay. I can tell you, I held out until 2 years of age, and then I just couldn't do it anymore. And yes, we went ahead and started it, and life was so much easier. But I can't speak to what studies have been done, in even younger children. So I will look to see if there's something out there that could help you feel comfortable with that. That's a really good question. Anything else, Joe?
Yeah, we got another one. What about daily use if needed? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yes. So yes. And so we'd like these kids to have a consistent experience of their world. And if they have autism, they have a reason to have a sleep disturbance. And so, like you might have a sleep disturbance, or maybe another, relative may have a sleep disturbance, or a friend, and there might be a reason why. There might be something really stressful. Maybe they have another medical issue that causes a sleep disturbance. And so for them, maybe, melatonin is useful, here and there to help them sleep on tough nights. Kids with autism have a reason to have a sleep disturbance, and it's just not going to go away. So it's really, really okay, and I think desirable to be very consistent in giving them the melatonin at night, so they can have a consistent experience of that if that is what helps them and they have sleep difficulties. Okay. Anything else, Joe? Okay. More on sleep hygiene. So exercise is good, but not before bedtime. You want at least like a 2 hour, window there, because it's going to hype you up and get your body going. And that's just not what you want. Is your body's you're trying to tell it it's time to start, packing things up, so to speak, and go to sleep. So exercise is good, but not before bedtime. Avoid caffeine or soda after 12. This is tricky. This is really tricky, and I really empathize with people I work with, my patients who are just tired a lot throughout the day. I mean, they're not sleeping well, and they're just so tired, and so they will rely on caffeine to just stay awake. And it's a real chicken and egg kind of thing. In that it's like, well, as a result of them relying on caffeine to stay awake, unfortunately, that caffeine has a really, really long half-life in their system, and that's going to interfere with sleep onset. And so you've really got to avoid caffeine before noon. And I bring up soda because I would say that's the most frequent caffeine I see in my patients are their caffeinated sodas as opposed to like coffee. And so I really would suggest that the cutoff is at noon, and I really suggest they stick with like one caffeinated drink and finish it by noon. Because I don't expect them to completely remove it from their diet, but I feel like if you could stick with one caffeinated drink and be completed by noon, that is a good place to start on limiting your caffeine and seeing how that helps with sleep. And then, of course, a comfortable bedroom. We talked about that. This is another important thing, teaching your child to fall asleep alone. We're going back to what our brain does when it sleeps. Appreciate you humoring me and letting me do this. Okay. I think I mentioned that when we do wake up in the middle of the night, which we all probably do, it's during this REM sleep. It's this very light phase of sleep, but we just fall right back asleep. We just fall right back asleep, and we don't even remember it. If that child needs their parent as kind of that, security blanket in a way to fall asleep, if that is the prop that child needs to fall asleep, when they cycle through these stages of sleep and end up back up here and wake up, they need that parent to fall asleep because that's how they learned how to fall asleep to begin with. Does that make sense? And so this is why when you have a child who's waking up in the middle of the night and going back to their parents' room or keeping their parents up, and the parents are like, oh, what do I do about my child's waking up in the middle of the night? What you do is you start here. You start at the very beginning, and you teach the child to fall asleep on their own without needing you right there, so that then when they wake up in the middle of the night, because that's not the issue, like we're all waking up, they easily fall right back to sleep. It's nothing for them to fall right back to sleep because they've learned how to do that. Okay. So teaching the child to fall asleep on their own is very important, particularly for kids who wake up throughout the night. You start with the onset of sleep and teach them how to fall asleep then. Another caveat, when I work with kids and adults with autism, short of general anesthesia, no medicine will get your kid to sleep if he or she or they, I need to update that, has something better to do than go to sleep. If they have anything competing with going to sleep, like TV or their phone or, even reading a book, like if they've got anything, that is going to compete with them falling asleep, if they're autistic, like, you can pull out the heavy hitters and you will not get them to sleep. I know this from example. I've been doing this for over 20 years. They taught me early on, I can throw the antipsychotics, high antipsychotics, Ativan, which is what we used to, when people were having status epilepticus. Like I will throw the heaviest stuff on these to try to get them to sleep, and they will not fall asleep if they're autistic if they've got something better to do, short of general anesthesia, which of course I do not do. And so I bring this up because this really goes back to that sleep hygiene. A major part of helping kids fall asleep and stay asleep is helping with that sleep hygiene surrounding the onset of sleep so that there isn't anything competing with their brain's ability to go to sleep. So medications in sleep hygiene. So medication selection depends on, what else is going on. We talked about melatonin, which is a great place to start. But, when I'm working with a person, they likely have a psychiatric issue that is part of this picture. And I will be targeting that psychiatric issue like bipolar disorder. Like I will target it in a manner that will also ensure they fall asleep. So I'm not trying to get them to sleep without addressing what's keeping them up, which is the mania. Like I'm definitely going to target that mania, but I'll do so in a manner that also is sedating and helps them fall asleep, at least at the onset, so that they can have 4, 5, 6 nights of consistent restorative sleep before I need to back down on that more sedating thing because that mood stabilizer has had a chance to work. So so when I work with with people who have medical psychiatric conditions that interfere with their sleep, psychosis or disruptive mood problem, or like I said, bipolar disorder, and they start having sleep disturbance, when that starts breaking through, rather than like chase the sleep disturbance, that's my signal. This other problem is rearing its head and it's starting with sleep. And so in addition to making sure I've got that, something going to help them fall asleep, I'm also increasing my management of that underlying mental health condition that really is starting to show its head, and it's going to continue to get worse unless I get on top of this. So it really is about context and putting it all together. So several psychiatric conditions can do this. I think it's important for you all to realize that several medications that treat psychiatric conditions contribute to sleep disturbance. I find myself more so than not discontinuing a psychiatric medicine, when I see someone, when they have sleep disturbance. I find myself discontinuing a medicine, maybe even more so than adding a medicine, although I'll typically increase what's on board as well. But I guess what I'm trying to say is part of the problem could be the medicine itself. And it's really important for providers to understand that, as well-meaning and well-intended as they have been in regards to their medications, they may inadvertently be causing or contributing to this problem, and we need to back off on that. And once again, medication intervention may be, as I said, maybe involve discontinuing rather than starting a medicine, because if someone is on a medicine that's going to interfere with their sleep, it's very hard to compete with that. When they're very dysregulated with their mood and their behavior and they're agitated and they're on a medicine that's interfering with their sleep, it is very hard to get on top of that and help them sleep until that medicine's discontinued. And then you have a step to stand on to help them go from there. So in the big pictures, yes, another question.
Sorry. Besides medicine, is there any other suggestions on how to help teach them to fall asleep independently?
Do you know that that is because as opposed to like lying down, um, because Joe, I know you're a behaviorist. May I put that on you and ask you if this is something that you see as you're working with kids? If does this ever come up as you're working with your families in early, because you work with early intervention, is that right, Joe?
Yes. Yeah, and I do. And some of the things that I do with my kiddos is I make sure that they're following a predictable set routine. And most of my kiddos aren't on melatonin or have medications or anything like that. So they follow a set routine and do it every single night. So if it's like the same book, it's almost like a visual, verbal, auditorial cue that they get like,
Yes.
to help them, their body realize, okay, it's time to slow down and we're gonna calm down. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's what I kind of get in there, that behavioral routine and getting those cues in.
And that consistency, and just like you said, so you have this consistency, you have this predictable routine, and you mentioned, and I think it's well said, it's a cue, it's a trigger. It's that environmental trigger in a positive way for your brain to realize it's time to start falling asleep. It's like we're starting this routine, and when this routine's over, we go to sleep. And it just starts helping prepare them so that that becomes their habit. Um, and having that routine, like you said, a book, but having that routine that is in a quieter place, like trying to set the environment up to allow that routine to be that much more successful. I think this is, I say this, but I know there's challenges to this, is is what would be ideal is that, when the child enters their bedroom in the evening, it's to go to sleep. Like, like it would be ideal if if the bedroom itself is just associated with sleep. And I know that's not a reality for many families. I mean, our homes are really small here, particularly in Utah, and so they very well might be doing lots of playing or watching TV or whatever in the room. And I'm not, it's you do what you can, or they're doing their homework in the room. But the degree to which their bedroom can be just for sleep, to Joe's point, will really help with that routine and those triggers their brain experiences as they enter into their bedroom in the evening. Any other suggestions out there? I get great ideas from you, from behaviorists and early intervention specialists.
So Debbie, we do have another one from Stephanie
Yes,
Solgla. She has a specific question about sleep and medication interference.
yes,
Stephanie, do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, so I have a family with a 2-year-old. So he has like problems. I guess there's a little bit of sleep apnea at night, some breathing issues, and so the doctor recommended doing like an inhaler before bed. And I'm wondering if that might be keeping him up or if there's like other
well,
options that would be available.
yeah, Stephanie, that's really interesting. And when you're right. Like albuterol is activating. And even though when you do an inhaler of albuterol, and so that's like used with asthma. Does the doctor think that the child has asthma too? Is that kind of part of the picture?
I'm not quite sure. I think they were thinking that because he breathes really loud, I guess, when he's sleeping, that they
Okay.
want to help him breathe.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
not quite
And then
sure.
do you know if, and I said albuterol because that's typically the inhaler we think about, but an inhaler that actually may kind of make sense is Flonase, which is a nasal inhaler, which is a steroid that will reduce inflammation, which, could be part of sleep apnea. Do you happen to know do you know if it's a nasal or is it like a mouth inhaler?
I don't know. That's a good question. I didn't
Uh,
even
Yeah,
think
and
there
so
were other
so
ones.
if it's albuterol, like I can appreciate that even though it's supposed to just be limited to the lungs. I mean, if you've worked with folks with asthma or you have asthma yourself, you use enough of it, you can feel it. It can be very jittery. It doesn't all just go to the lungs, so that can be problematic. Um, but I'm wondering if they're really talking about like an allergy, like a Flonase that's a steroid
Mm.
to help reduce that inflammation. I can't say that I definitely could see that done like in the morning, and I don't think it would be it would interfere with sleep onset unless the child's 2. That's going to feel weird. That may be upsetting to the child. And so I could appreciate why you might want to separate that from sleep. Plus, steroids have a long mechanism of action. They really do. And so thinking about so for that family to ask their doctor if there could be a different timing of that inhaler, if it were a steroid, so that it may not be part of the agitation surrounding having something in their face, blowing something into an orifice, to make sure that that's not part of it, maybe really helpful. With obstructive sleep apnea, the child is 2. I suspect that doctor is also probably talking about getting that child's tonsils out and that child's adenoids out. These are tonsils and adenoids are just in the back of our throat that kind of are around our airway that are part of our immune system that can get big and inflamed and can lead to obstruction. And so nowadays, it's often the first line of addressing sleep apnea is getting your tonsils and adenoids out, although this child is 2. And so understandably, they may want to wait somewhat before they put that child under anesthesia, which makes a lot of sense. Although as you hit 2, I'm used to, as I think about other, pediatric procedures that are elective, usually after 2 seems to be more likely to happen, but I can appreciate how they'll be holding off on doing that just because they want to hold off on exposing to anesthesia. Did that help?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad they're thinking about sleep apnea because that will be awakening them. I'm just wondering if there might be another timing to it. And if it is albuterol, that's a little different. I can't speak to someone else's medical decision making, and I am boarded in pediatrics. I maintain my boards. I take the exam, to maintain my boards, periodically. I just did it again, last fall. But even so, it's not ringing a bell to use that for sleep apnea, but maybe that is what some folks are doing for sleep apnea as far as albuterol goes. But if it's a steroid inhaler, there may be another timing that could work that won't inadvertently, lead to just that irritability or discomfort. And then, I did want to let you know, melatonin is great. You get it over the counter. I have to say, I really do appreciate it when I have patients in group homes because their melatonin source is pharmaceutical grade, and that's really awesome, and that's great. But the rest of us, including my household, we do regular melatonin over the counter. That is just fine. But just make sure there are no other active ingredients in it, just melatonin. So, and it is not slipped in there. It is advertised as such. Melatonin extra, melatonin plus, they'll stick L-theanine, they'll stick, GABA, they'll stick all sorts of stuff in there. You don't want that. Our autistic kids don't do great with that. You really just want the regular melatonin. And then when you feel like things are at a good place with that sleep hygiene and we try melatonin and it's just really hard to get that consistent restorative sleep, once again, kind of think about other contributing conditions with their provider. Right. Oh, and I did mention Josh. He's my 13-year-old. He's autistic with lots of ability. And this is his older brother, Andy. And this is a selfie they took when Andy took his little brother night skiing. I have to say, major bonus points there for Andy taking his little brother night skiing, which was quite nice. But I just want to acknowledge, all of our families and the patients we serve. And this is the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, which is my, mothership, regards to just the work that I do. Does anyone have any, I'm going to stop this share. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts? I also want to be mindful of the time. I know you have a case presentation, so you might have to jump over to that soon as well.
Yeah, well, I loved your thing and your talk where you said being dysregulated in the day. Like I said, I get to do the case presentation, and just when you said that, it hit so much on what me and this family had talked about is they were all dysregulated throughout the day. And really, when we looked to say why were they dysregulated, it came down to the sleep. And so I loved hearing that comment and thought of it. We'll leave it open for 1 minute. If one person wants to ask a question, I'll.
And thanks, Joe, for helping me with that and keeping an eye on the questions.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to then start sharing my screen and go over the case. Maybe. Okay. Did it switch to my right screen? Yes, hopefully. Okay.
Yes, yes.
All right. So my name is Janelle Preston. I work in our Part C early intervention program here up in northern Utah. I have a special ed degree. I've been doing it for 25 years. We have a program in our program called the ABC program, and that is what I'm the team lead over. I have a little kiddo that I'm working with. They live at home with both parents in the basement of grandparents' house. A little bit about this family. They have been told by the healthcare provider to wait and see. They've been worried about early indicators or of autism as well as just developmental delay since he was about 10 months old and have been really discouraged that they were told to wait and see. He's now 32 months, and that's really when he was referred to our early intervention program. And so we've missed a lot of years of providing services. He has received an autism diagnosis, and that's what prompted the referral to our program. The parents are super stressed and have been stressed for, mom would say, for 2 years solid. So they're really living in this anxiety of stress. Their primary areas of concern have really been that struggling with sleep. He has major meltdowns, so that comment of being dysregulated throughout the day really, like I said, hit home with me. Parents are exhausted. They just are at their wits' end on things. Mom does want to stop nursing, but is currently the method used that to help the child fall asleep. So that he's been nursing throughout the day as well as at bedtime. You can't really see that because it's really small, but their main goals and barriers their goals are to improve those sleep patterns. So they want to use a consistent bedtime routine that promotes better sleep without nursing. And they want to reduce the night wakings and also help the child sleep. They would like to enhance communication skills. So using some kind of communication, whether it's an AAC device or limited picture exchange, really to help reduce that frustration. They want to encourage some development of verbal communication. They also want to manage those meltdowns. So the parents want to be able to teach the child some self-regulation techniques, support independence. So engaging in those self-soothing behaviors that don't involve nursing, as well as to promote some interactions, social interactions. So encouraging some of those play-based activities. Some of the barriers that family is facing is that parents are exhausted. They really aren't seeing how they can do some things. They've been frustrated for the last 2 years, so they're pretty exhausted and they have lack of sleep. So they're pretty dysregulated throughout the day as well. They do notice that their child is resistant to change. and are worried about some of those behaviors that he can have. They also have some limited resources. So they are living in the basement of their parents' house, and grandparents, while they're kind and considerate of a lot of things, really don't want to hear that screaming and head banging and all of the behaviors that this little kiddo has with it. So they want to make sure that they're respecting that. So what I would love to have as our discussion, and we're going to have two breakout groups. So Joe, your group will be taking these questions underneath number 1, so some sleep strategies. So looking at what are some evidence-based strategies to help the child improve their sleep patterns. How can they establish a consistent bedtime routine that does not rely on nursing? And what are some things that parents could do to introduce a new sleep association to replace that nursing? And then Justin, your guys' group will be taking around that professional support. Because as I mentioned, parents were really concerned that they were told to wait and see, even though they had these questions about that. So what role can healthcare professionals play in supporting this family? How can parents effectively communicate their concerns and needs to healthcare providers to receive that support? And what are some gentle weaning techniques that can transition the child away from nursing? And then Debbie, I see you have your hand raised for a question.
So just with it sounds like the child also nurses throughout the day, but in particular, this is what's used at night to help the child soothe and fall asleep. Is there what type of difficulties is the child having with separation from mom in general? I mean, just as I think about throughout the day with the nursing, I'm just wondering, how is that child managing throughout the day when there is separation from mom? Or because as when I think about nighttime, that's a big separation if we're trying to help the child with it. But I'm wondering if there are issues throughout the day that are also happening with that.
So in particular, this kid does some really nice separation. He really is only using mom for the breast, and mom doesn't feel like he's necessarily connecting her necessarily with that. It's just that he uses the breast as regulation. So she would like to have some different ways to help him regulate, if that answers your question. And then, Raina, I'll take one more question from you. I will be moving in and out of your guys' breakout groups.
I just want to know if this is her only child, their only child.
It is their only child.
Okay.
Okay, so Leo, if you want to put us in breakout groups, and like I said, I'll be moving back and forth. Are at time, so I'm not going to have us go over it, but if you want all those resources, just go and check our Canvas page and they will all be there. I appreciate everybody's time for our session today and all those amazing insights, and for Debbie doing the great presentation on sleep. We are having our session next month, and that will be April 23rd. And the topic is leaving my brain right now. So I'll double check, but we have a session and a topic. And if you want to do a case presentation, please reach out and we'll get you on there. Thank you, everybody.
Families, right? The families are joining. The parents?
Oh, yes, that's right. The families. We are having it. That is the best session, is hearing things from families. So thank you, Justin, for letting us know the topic. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.